start? I guess so. Well, that was our cue, everyone. Welcome this afternoon. Hello, I hope everybody's having a great afternoon. We're excited to kick off the July Disability Male Employee General Membership Meeting. We're so lucky to have an opportunity like this over our lunch hour to come together to learn, to create awareness, to improve access for patients and employees, and to also walk away with a little inspiration to continue the great work you all do at Mayo Clinic each and every day. Those joining us via the live stream webcast on the video exchange, welcome. If you are joining us, please send us a note to our email address. It's up on the screen, and let us know you're watching. Later on in the event, you can also submit your questions to the same email address. That email address, as you can see, is merge.rsd.disability@mayo.edu. My name is Dawn Kirchner, and I'm the current chair of the Disability Male Employee Resource Group. For those of you I have not met before, I work in human resources as a disability recruitment specialist. My passion is supporting people with disabilities and veterans in finding life-changing careers at Mayo. We have a very active Mayo Employee Resource Group, and before we start our event, I'd like to share some of the background on our merge. The mission of the Disability Merge is aligned well with the Mayo Clinic values, and the primary purpose is to improve the work environment and patient experience for people with disabilities. We welcome employees from all backgrounds to join us and work towards positive change in the lives of employees, families, and patients with visible and invisible disabilities. Our mission is so important, and our speaker today has been instrumental in helping our merge set the stage to influence a disability-friendly culture at Mayo Clinic. Val Halling works in Integrity and Compliance Office as an operations manager. She served as the Disability Merge Secretary for 2 years and continues to be an active leader for our merge. She assisted with organizing a World Cafe to gather feedback from our membership to develop our priorities and action plans. Val is representation from the 9% of parents who work and care for a child with special needs. Val will share the joys, pain, and experiences of developing as a person while her son Jason was growing up. Dr. Hamlet Peterson will also join her to talk about his experience in Jason and Val's journey. Dr. Peterson worked for over 30 years in children's orthopedic surgery. He is currently an emeritus staff member. Please welcome Val Halling and Dr. Peterson to present today.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I'm going to switch PowerPoints here quick. Some of my most happy and painful years were when I was raising my son, Jason, who was born with a physical disability. Before his birth, I never realized the obstacles that persons with disabilities face every day of their lives. I also never realized the joy a child with a disability feels when at the age of 4, he feeds himself for the first time, or at the age of 5, he stands up for the first time. I will describe the joys and pains that Jason and I lived through while he was growing up, how I developed as a person through these experiences, and how Mayo Clinic Spirit touched our lives in our journey through life. The following poem, written by Arnie Mangum, gave me a lot of encouragement as I was going through life and needed it most. It's called Heaven's Very Special Child. A meeting was held quite far from earth. It's time again for another birth. Said the angels to the Lord above, the special child will need much love. His progress may be very slow, accomplishment he may not know, and he'll require extra care from the folks he meets down there. He may not run or laugh or play. His thoughts may seem quite far away. In many ways, he won't adapt, and he'll be known as handicapped. So let's be careful where he's sent. We want his life to be content. Please, Lord, find the parents who will do a special job for you. They will not realize right away the leading role they're asked to play, but with this child sent from above comes stronger faith and richer love. And soon they'll know the privilege given in caring for their gift from heaven. Their precious charge, so meek and mild, is heaven's very special child. It was 11:26 a.m. on September 25th, 1970 in Faribault, Minnesota. It's a boy, the nurse said. After she cleaned and wrapped Jason up, I got a quick glimpse of him before they took him to the nursery. I was taken back to my room, given lunch, and one of the nurses said that it will be a little while before I can see Jason because he was a little stiff from birth, and they wanted to do some observations for a while. About 5 p.m., the doctor finally came into the room and said that they had determined that Jason had some physical defects that would need to be assessed from someone that works with children with physical disabilities. He suggested at that time we notify March of Dimes for assistance and an assessment. A nurse finally brought Jason into the room and I was able to hold him. All wrapped up, he looked like any other normal baby. In fact, someone had commented that he looked like he could play football someday. As I unwrapped the blankets, the physical defects were apparent. He was unable to bend his arms at the elbow. He had, his legs were bent inward at the knees at a 45-degree angle, and he had extreme club feet. As in most hospitals, the labor and delivery room is one of the happiest. Long-awaited babies are born, and everyone is happy and excited to go home with and begin their life with their newest addition to the family. But for those that have babies with problems, there are many mixed emotions that surface. One of the first emotions that I remember feeling was sadness. My baby, so sweet and innocent, had so many problems to face as he went through life. I was also scared, not knowing where to begin. I worried about my ability to do what needed to be done. Was I even capable of it? I also worried about how people would treat Jason because he was different than other children. I was angry too, but I quickly repressed that because I didn't even know who I was angry at. So the happiness that I felt right after the birth was taken over with sadness, fear, confusion, and anger. And when I realized the amount of responsibility I now had, I grew up in a few short hours at the age of 16. Fortunately, my dad worked with someone who was a Shriner, and Dad's friend arranged for us to have an appointment up at Shriners Hospital in Minneapolis. The earliest that we could get in was November, which was a couple months later. And it seemed like a long time before that day finally came when we were able to have Jason looked at. After a lot of blood tests, a lot of x-rays and other tests, the doctor said that Jason had what's called arthrogryposis congenita, a very rare disorder that affected most of Jason's joints. He also said that although they could do some corrective surgery, Jason would never walk, run, or play like other children. Jason was admitted to the hospital that day for observation, and we went through the registration and admitting process, and we were given a small tour. There were children of all ages at Shriners Hospital. Some of the children were in wheelchairs, some walked with crutches, some were lying on carts. There were children with so many disabilities, some much worse than others. I do remember one little boy that has impression to me through these years. He was laying on a cart and he didn't have any arms or any legs, and he was friendly as could be, smiling and welcoming. Like most people, I had no idea that there were so many children that had so many different kinds of problems. Even more surprising to me was that these children were happy. They would smile as we walked by, and some would stop to visit. Most of the children really seemed to enjoy what they were doing. We finally got to the room with the babies, where the cribs were, and that was where Jason would be staying. The nurses were all so nice there. In fact, everyone we had met was very welcoming and wonderful. The children were not allowed to keep their own clothes or their toys, and they were provided with those, so everybody had the same kind of clothes and toys. Visiting hours were only a few hours a week, so that meant we lived in Owatonna, that we went see Jason maybe only a couple hours a week. Even though I knew he would be well taken care of, it was definitely hard to leave him there. This is Shriners Hospital back in 1970. In December, Jason was baby Jesus. Can't see him, but he was there. This was the baby room, and you can see by these pictures Jason's legs and his feet. But he was smiling for the most part, a little grumpy on the right, but overall he had a happy disposition whenever we did go see him. For the first 5 years of Jason's life, he spent maybe 2 years at home. He had several surgeries at Shriners to straighten his feet and to bend one arm so that maybe someday he'd be able to feed himself. After each surgery, there was physical therapy, and by the age of 4, he was able to feed himself with special silverware. Until I had surgery a few years ago myself, I didn't realize the pain and all the after effects of surgery, how much people go through. And maybe it was better, I did not know. I'm not sure if I would have been able to let him go through all those surgeries. To this day, he does not like the smell of anesthesia. Jason eventually learned to crawl and was able to get around the house quite well on his own. One morning, he got up before I did, and he was hungry. So the only thing he could reach in the refrigerator was a bowl of chocolate pudding. He managed to get it out, and he couldn't reach any silverware, so he ate it the only way he could, and that's by putting his face into the chocolate pudding. So when I got up, he was smiling as could be and was all full of chocolate pudding. In spite of all that Jason went through the first few years of his life, he was quite a happy child. He was very social. He knew everyone at the hospital. Oftentimes I couldn't find him because he was off visiting. He was not afraid of anyone, and people did seem to be drawn to him. I guess he was just happy to be alive. Whenever I started getting discouraged with life, I would think about all that Jason has had to cope with and gone through. And I knew that nothing that ever happened to me could compare to all that Jason had gone through. We finally got a wheelchair for Jason when he turned 5 years old. The Courage Center in Minneapolis had a loaner program. They would loan wheelchairs out to people who couldn't afford them or afford to buy one. And we were all so excited. I have been carrying Jason around for 5 years, and it probably kept me in shape, but he was getting quite heavy. After receiving the wheelchair, the first thing we did is went to the grocery store. And that was the first time he could take off. And so I had to search the grocery store and find Jason, and I found him by the candy. And he was piling bags of candy up, happy as could be, thinking that I would be able to buy those for him. But that was the first time he could go off by himself, and he was having a great time. We were living in Owatonna at this time, and Jason was able to start preschool. Because the school is required to provide transportation, and Owatonna didn't have any buses, he had to go to school in a taxi cab. So every day he went to school in a taxi cab. Although he had not spent much time with other children without disabilities, he adjusted well, and he really enjoyed going to school. Again, it played well into his social side. One night when Jason was 5 years old, he got really sick. He was vomiting, couldn't keep anything down. He started having convulsions, and the doctors in Owatonna said, take him to St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester. So we drove him to Rochester, and all the way there, I've never been so afraid. I've never been around someone who was convulsing, and his eyes would roll back, and head would roll back. It was one of the longest rides from Owatonna to Rochester. And when we got to, he almost did not make it that night through the night. They performed a lot of tests, and they really struggled finding out what was wrong with him. They eventually diagnosed him with diabetes, and so he had insulin for a few days, and then after that he didn't need it anymore and sent him home on a diabetic diet. While he was in the hospital, the Mayo orthopedic doctors came by to see Jason and evaluate his physical condition. The doctors believed that they could do surgery on his knees to straighten them, and that with braces and crutches, he may be able to walk someday. So after much thought, we decided to go ahead with the surgery in the spring of 1976. Jason was in surgery for most of the day and was put in intensive care following the surgery. Because his veins and arteries were so tight, when they straightened out his leg, he started bleeding in one leg. So they left the incision open in hopes that it would drain, and then they would be able to sew him back up. But within a week, he had developed gangrene in that leg. So they took Jason back to surgery, and prior to surgery, the surgeon who was here, Dr. Peterson, said that there was a possibility that they would have to amputate his leg at the knee. This was the second longest day of my life, waiting for Jason to come out of surgery. He went in his first case, and I didn't hear anything throughout the day. I guess I fell asleep, and I woke up to Dr. Peterson waking me up and saying, Val, we're out of surgery. Jason is doing fine, but we did have to amputate his leg at the knee. The next thing I remember seeing Jason's cart wheel by. He had one leg in traction and the other leg down, so it was a reality. Jason spent about 2 months in the surgery, or in the hospital after that surgery. I felt very guilty for making the decision for him to have the surgery. And when he woke up from the surgery, he looked at me and said, Mommy, look at my leg. And I can still see his sad eyes as I lifted the blanket while he intently looked at me in the face. So I believed at that time that Jason was looking to see how I responded to him having one leg, and that would set the stage for how we thought other people would view him with one leg. So to do it, and maybe that was not right, but to do that without any emotion was one of the hardest things I have done. Again, and he remained in the hospital for 2 months. I think that everyone during that time did their best to inform us of everything. There were so many times, though, that I was confused and felt lost. I didn't understand a lot of what was happening, I don't think. Had there been nurse communicators like there are today, maybe some of the confusion and fear would have been less. I'm not sure. But all of the nurses, the doctors, the surgeons, surgical staff, dietitians, social workers, candy stripers, housekeepers, all played such an important role in mine and Jason's life during that time. The Mayo Clinic spirit was there every day with Jason, as well as with me. When Jason was sent home, he needed much home care. He was fitted for a brace and a temporary prosthesis. Ironically, he was able to stand with a walker for the first time in his life. Seeing Jason stand and seeing the smile was so uplifting. How something so many of us take for granted could bring so much joy to another taught me another lesson about life. There are so many things that we take for granted that we should be thankful for. The whole year after Jason got out of the hospital after his amputation was a hard year for us. In the fall of that year, Jason had to have another surgery on his hips to bring his hips forward, so he was in a better position to eventually walk someday. I was going to school to be a laboratory technician so that I could hopefully one day have a decent job that could support Jason and I. Jason's father and I had divorced, so Jason was pretty dependent on me during this time. So I was going to school in Faribault all day, and then after school, I would drive to Rochester and get here in time to feed Jason and spend an hour with him and then go back to Faribault. I was getting a lot of pressure from the playroom lady. I don't know that that was her official title, but no one can make you feel guilty, but I felt that she felt that I should be spending more time with Jason. And so I was really torn at that time. If I spent more time at the hospital, I would have to quit school. I didn't know who to talk to about this. I did not know if there would be a better time in my life to go to school, and I was so close to getting done. Should I provide now or later? Those questions went in my head. I did make the decision to stay in school and hoped that that was the best decision, knowing that Jason was being well taken care of while he was in the hospital. After I got out of school, we moved to Houston, Texas on a whim. During that time, I got my first job at Gulf Coast Regional Blood Center. That's where I started my blood banking career. But during that time, we had some things that really impressed me in life, and negatively, I guess. Jason, if you remember, he was getting sick, and they treated him. Well, through the years, he would get sick, and I'd have to take him back to the hospital, and all they needed to do was give him IV fluid because he was so acidotic that would get him back up so he could go home. And they never did find out what was causing that, if something was causing him to get sick or getting sick was causing this to happen. Well, that happened when I was in Houston. And when I took him to the hospital closest to where we were living, it was in Pasadena. And I had a letter from Mayo Clinic saying that if I were to bring Jason anywhere, this is what he would need, and that he needed this IV fluid. And so I gave them the letter, and they were taking information. I had just started a job, so I didn't have health insurance. And when they found that out, they said, we can't see you. You're going to have to take Jason to Ben Taub, somewhere in Houston, where people go that can't afford to pay. And didn't have gun shop people, all those kind of people. Anyway, so being turned away from, I begged them. I said, I will pay. I promise I'll pay. All he needs is IV fluid. That's all he needs, and I can take him home. And they wouldn't treat him. So I found my way downtown Houston to Ben Taub. I thought and there's a lot of tunnels down when you get into that Houston Medical Center. And I thought I was at Ben Taub, and someone came and they laid Jason down on a cart in the middle of the hall while I was giving them information. And as it turned out, I was at Herman Hospital, and they said they can't treat him there because I didn't have insurance. So while he was laying in the hall, and I'm trying to figure out how to get to Ben Taub, and he's almost convulsing and sick, a physician walked by, and he asked about Jason, what was wrong with him. I told him, I showed him this letter, and he said, I'll be right back. And he came back, and he said, we're taking Jason up to intensive care. And I forgot this physician's name, but he had grant money. He was a genetic doctor, and he managed to get him in, and that's where Jason continued to get care while we were there. Also, while I was working, finding daycare for a child with disability back in the 70s was not easy. Either people were afraid to take care of someone with a disability, or they weren't certified. So it left you in a bad position for daycare. And I had to rely on new friends I made down there and my old friends who went with me. Well, that didn't work out, and I got a new job working overnights as supervisor. Well, then it was really near impossible to find daycare. So I asked if I could bring Jason to work and let him sleep in the women's lounge, and then I would take him to school in the morning while he ate breakfast with the donor people. So I was able to do that, and it worked out well. We didn't have a lot of people at night, but one lady asked if she could bring her kids in during the 3 to 11 shift, and so then I couldn't bring them anymore. So I came back to Minnesota, and I think a lot of it was missing family, and having them around. And this is where I got my job here at Transfusion Medicine at Mayo in 1979. Jason was mainstream then in the Rochester Public School. Mayo Spirit was alive and well with Dr. Ann Scott, who was Children with Physical Disabilities strongest advocate here. She worked in PM&R. Jason entered school. He did quite well, although it was really hard for him because he never got invited to birthday parties, or he couldn't go outside and play with the other kids during playtime or after school. He wasn't able to do those things. So what he did, he started watching a lot of sports on TV and soon developed a love for sports. He said to me, "Mom, my dream is that someday I will play baseball." How sad that was for me. It seemed that this was not possible, but I didn't want to discourage him from having that dream. In 1981, he went to a 6-week camp in Worthington, Minnesota it was called Lakeville School for Crippled Children. He had so much fun those 6 weeks. He was with a lot of other children with disabilities. And he asked if he could come back to school, if he could go to school there for the next year. Of course, I didn't want him to do that, but he begged. He said, "I just feel so good there, Mom." So I had to work with the Rochester School District to approve that, and why it would be better for Jason to go there than to be mainstreamed. And eventually they said, okay, he can go. During that time, when Jason was here, he's Santa Claus. No more baby Jesus, now he's Santa Claus. But he obviously likes Christmas. While he was there, he wrote this poem. Our lonely years on earth. When we are handicapped, like me and my friends, it's hard to live when you have one leg. Some people are deaf. They cannot understand what we say. Some people cannot talk like me and you. If you want to know what this story means, handicapped people want to be like you. The end. Bryce was the little boy who could not hear. They all had physical defects, but he couldn't hear. And Mike S. Wasn't able to talk and used a talking board. So Jason wrote this and signed the three of them. Jason always tried to do things on his own. Of course, this took a lot of patience on my part, and my kids that are here know that's not always easy. It was so much easier for me to do things for him than to wait for him to figure it out. But in spite of this, he soon was able, he learned how to pour milk. He learned how to go to the bathroom by himself. He learned how to drink a bottle of pop. He learned how to print his name, and the list went on and on. One day, he even made his own sandwich, had it on the table, and it took him a long time to make a bologna sandwich. And he wheeled away to get, I think, maybe something to drink, and we had 2 beagles at that time. And they saw that sandwich, very tempting, and ate the whole sandwich. My heart just broke. So I made him a new bologna sandwich and I make him do it again. But each new thing that he learned, it was such an accomplishment for him. The Courage Center offered swimming lessons here in Rochester at the YMCA for children with disabilities. Jason's instructors were physical therapists from Mayo Clinic.